Morning everybody, welcome to our meeting of the Nottinghamshire and City of Nottingham Fire and Rescue Authority Policy and Strategy Committee on Friday the 26th of April, 10 o'clock, I think just here at Joint Police and Fire Headquarters at Sherwood Lodge. Welcome to all members and officers present, and welcome to our colleague from Notts TV as well. You're very welcome. This is obviously being recorded for the interests of members of the public. Our first item on the agenda is apologies for absence, and I think we've got apologies from Councillor Wheeler and Councillor Butley. You're most welcome, substituting for Jonathan. Good to see you, Richard, and other colleagues. I don't think there are any other apologies.
Just Malcolm Town.
Just Malcolm. It's subject to later in the report, it's Malcolm's last day today at Nottingham City Council, so sending Malcolm our best for his last day at the City Council, and more about that later on the agenda. Item 2 then is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest by any members or officers present at the meeting? No. Item 3 then is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of February, which are on page 3 as it is numbered, the yellow pages in your agenda. Are there any comments or questions people want to raise in relation to the minutes? People happy to approve them as an accurate record? They agreed? Thank you, colleagues. Item 4 then will be introduced by the Chief Fire Officer, and this is in relation to governance arrangements going forward.
Thank you, Chair. Very brief report, members. Not a formality because it's subject to your discussion and you're back in the recommendations, but the two recommendations are obviously the arrangement with regard the direct employment of the clerk and monitoring officer be noted, and members note the arrangements for provision of governance services were reviewed in due course. That second one really related, I think was one of the first reports when I came in as Chief Fire Officer. There was an amendment to the Constitution around delegations to the Chief in consultation with the Chair, and there was comments by members at the time that we need to be a bit more routine and regular about the review of the Constitution and arrangements. And one of the first things, if this is agreed today, is that the Clerk Monitoring Officer will start to do that work on behalf of the Fire Authority to make sure we bring all governance and constitution arrangements up to date, and really put in a routine plan about how they are reviewed on an ongoing basis. So it links back to a report and an ask of members previously, really. It says in this main section of the report, obviously, and the Chair's just sort of said, Malcolm Townrow is leaving the City Council. There was a conversation held between myself, the Chair and the Clerk about, okay, so what do we do then? And we've been working with the Clerk and our People Services here to try and make sure we keep that corporate memory basically of Malcolm until such time as there are other arrangements or the Constitution is reviewed and things change in due course. So the proposal is that Malcolm obviously will be retained in employment by the Fire and Rescue Service on behalf of the authority appointed officer. And I think that's about all I'm going to say on it, Chair. The financial costs will be kept within the current cost. There's no increase in the costs in the sense of that at all. And then we'll review, as it says in there, the governance services, because clearly Malcolm's been provided from the City Council and other elements of governance are still provided from the City Council. So we need to make sure we work out that relationship. But I believe that with Malcolm coming from the City, he knows all the ins and outs, he knows everybody to talk to. So we feel it's going to be as smooth a transition as there could be. I think that's all I want to say, Chair, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chief. Just to add further, because obviously, as the Chief said, there's a conversation between myself, the Chief, and Malcolm as our monitoring officer and clerk. Obviously, there is a legal requirement for the authority to have a monitoring officer, and we need continuity of arrangement, notwithstanding Malcolm's decision about retiring from the City Council. And it seemed to me to make eminent sense to retain his experience. He's been with the Fire Authority since 2005, July 2005, so he's been coming up to 20 years next year. And whilst we are similar to local authorities, particularly the constituent authorities that make up the authority, the City Council and the County Council, we are obviously a very different beast in terms of our constitutional and governance arrangements and the legal implications for us in terms of decision making, and Malcolm is incredibly well versed on that, and I think I speak for all members in saying that he's an even-handed, fair clerk and monitoring officer, and he's given us very good advice, expert advice over the years. So I think this makes sense. There's no additional cost to us. Malcolm's really keen to continue doing it for us, and it gives us obviously that continuity going forward. We've obviously got some changes coming forward in terms of legislation. We've got a new mayor being elected. What does that mean for the Fire Authority over the next 4 or 5 years? Is there going to be a change of the Police and Crime Commissioner next week at the election? What does that mean in terms of the Fire Authority? I think it's really important from a governance perspective that we've got some degree of continuity, which obviously we have here with putting in place this arrangement to retain Malcolm directly as an employee as he leaves the City Council today. So the recommendations, as the Chief said, are that the arrangements with regard to the direct employment of the Clerk and Monitoring Officer be noted, and also that members note the arrangements for provision of governance services will be reviewed in due course, which obviously the Chief's spoken to. We don't need to formally make a decision about employing Malcolm, because obviously there was a decision taken by the authority in 2005, so that's dealt with in terms of the decision that was taken then. Are there any comments and questions people want to raise? Sybil?
Absolutely support this. I think this is absolutely the right way to go to safeguard things for the authority moving and for continuity.
Thank you, Sybil. Anybody else?
No, I just agree with what you're saying.
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, agreed, yes. I think it's good.
Thank you, Patience. I'll move the recommendations then. Is somebody happy to second the recommendations?
Second.
Are they agreed, colleagues?
Yes.
Yeah, everybody's in agreement. Thank you very much. That was agreed unanimously. Item 5 then will be introduced by Leila, and this is the 10-year workforce diversity plan, which obviously has been subject to some discussion at the strategic advisory board around equalities, and I think it's been discussed once here before as well, or at least reference to Leila. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as the Chair said, before Christmas there was a meeting of the Strategic Inclusion Board, and a proposal was presented concerning a longer-term approach to support diversification of the workforce. So this report really has been brought to Policy and Strategy Committee for endorsement, because it does sign the authority and the service up for a long-term commitment and a longer-term approach. I think it's no secret about both the sector challenges and the local challenges that there have been to diversity, particularly within the operational firefighter cohort. Section 1.7 does set out the progress that we've made to date in terms of diversification of the workforce, which is encouraging, but I think we would all admit is slower than we would like to see. So following on from our own internal EDI review, which was conducted a couple of years ago, one of the recommendations within that related to adopting a longer-term approach to diversification of the workforce, and to identify the appropriate resources and the plan and strategy to be able to deliver that. So what I'd like to do is to just talk you through the proposal for the approach that we're planning to take. So as section 2.1 sets out, we're aiming to be very methodical in the way that we're doing it in an analyse, plan, do, review type project manner. And at the moment we are in that analysis phase. So there's 3 main stages to that. One is to use publicly accessible data sets, including the census data, and we're working with specialists at Nottinghamshire University. They are going to help us to interpret and understand how our communities are changing, and that is going to enable us to set more meaningful and purposeful targets for different areas across the county. What we're also doing is some really exciting work with focus groups within the city specifically to understand, I suppose, from a personal perspective, what people's views and perceptions are of the Fire and Rescue Service, how well they understand what we do and what the roles within our organisation entail, and also to really understand in the first person what barriers they see to joining our organisation. And I think once we've got that understanding and insight, both from the numbers and the quantitative data, but also that qualitative information from communities, that will help us to then build a really meaningful plan that's deliverable, stretching with targets, but also achievable. The third part I'd like to just pick out in section 2.5 is about the impact that socio-economic deprivation has when we're talking about diversity as well. And as you'll see, section 2.5 sets out that based on the recommendations of our independent review, we have started to include socio-economic deprivation in the analysis phase and as part of our equality impact assessment process. So the remainder of the report sets out really how we're going to seek to use the data that we're gathering and analysing at the moment. That work will be completed by June. And we will then seek to bring a more detailed report back to members outlining our approach and the targets and metrics that we're going to be using for monitoring. I think the way that we have talked before in terms of objective setting has been a bit limited. When you look at section 2.9, you'll see actually the diversity of the workforce varies greatly depending on whether we're talking about support staff, our on-call workforce or our whole-time workforce. And really we'll be seeking to undertake targeted activities to make improvement in the areas where it's required. So, as I've said, by the summer we'll have a better understanding of what conclusions can be drawn from the data. Also, at the same time, what we are doing as part of the review into our prevention function is looking to carve out dedicated resources for community engagement activity, and that will include supporting the associated positive action work to deliver the plan. So we've got a significant cohort of both operational and non-uniform staff now available to us to form those longer term and more meaningful relationships with communities, which we anticipate is what we're going to need to do. So there'll be a renewed focus on youth engagement and youth work as part of that community engagement team. So the recommendations of the report really seek to endorse the approach that the service is adopting, and then I've recommended that future updates are passed through the HR committee if Policy and Strategy Committee are in agreement with that.
Thank you, Leila.
Thank you.
I think this is I think you've heard this from members before, but I think it's an excellent piece of work, and I think you and the wider team should be commended. Obviously, it's good to see you here, Matt, as well, and I know how much your team have fed into to this, so thank you, and thank you for the way you presented the report, Leila. For me, any organisation I think that wants to make progress in what is an absolutely critical area needs to be self-aware, self-critical and stretching its ambition, and I think this report demonstrates that that's exactly what this service is doing. It's holding up a mirror to itself, it's challenging itself, it's saying yes, we've made progress, but there's more progress to make. And I think you've heard me say before that if we are to be a relevant emergency service that retains the trust of the community where we represent, and we have to be reflective of it, and that certainly means improving the number of female firefighters but also members of female staff, but it also clearly means improving the number of people we have from ethnic minority backgrounds and the LGBT community, as well as people with disabilities. And I think the service deserves huge commendation for the strides it's made to have doubled the number of female firefighters over the decade, or virtually doubled, just over doubled, I think, over the decade, is significant. We've nearly doubled the number of staff from ethnic minority backgrounds. We've quadrupled the number virtually of LGBT staff, which is significant strides. We've obviously made a slight slip back in terms of staff with disabilities, but it is a very, very slight slip backwards. There's always more to do, and I think this 10-year plan sets out an ambition to do that, and how we're going to achieve it. I think particularly the two things that I'm impressed by is looking, the willingness to look at the hard data, but also the softer but just as important stuff around community insight, and actually speaking to some of these community groups who feel perhaps not linked to the fire service, feel that the fire service maybe isn't relevant to them, maybe don't understand enough about the organisation. I think the ambition to go further in that work, obviously we already do some really good stuff with underrepresented groups. We've got the advisory board, obviously, in terms of some of our policy decisions, etc. I think is really good. So I think all round colleagues who have worked hard on this piece of work should be commended, and I think it makes sense for the Human Resources Committee, obviously closest to this, to hold the ring on this issue. But I think you can take it from colleagues here I think I can speak for everybody cross-party at the Policy and Strategy Committee. I think you've got everybody's backing on the authority to make strides in this area because we know just how important it is. One minor thing, just in terms of our reporting, and I think this is just a typographical thing, we talk about in 2.9 LGBT staff, but on the table on page 9 at the top 1.7 we only reference LGB staff, so we just need to, that's a tidying up issue, it's nothing more.
Yeah.
It's a typographical thing if anything, but an excellent piece of work, and I fully endorse the recommendations. Nigel?
Yeah, just briefly, more to do with the report than the content. On the perhaps some numbers as well as the percentages.
Yeah.
On the group 2013 2023 would sort of give a bit more context to it.
Great recommendation, Nigel.
Yeah.
I'm sure that could be picked up.
Yeah.
Chief?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I know members know this is kind of like a part of a bigger thing, and there are some things in here that imply why haven't you got that already. We've got so many of these things already that we do it. But I think what we've realised over the last 12 months in particular, and since the review that Leila referenced, we needed a lot more clarity and we actually needed to put some actions in. So Leila mentioned positive action. That's normally the thing that employers do prior to just about recruitment. This is about we've moved resources off of fire engines. They are still operational roles, but we've moved them off of fire engines to focus on positive action and other bits in the organisation, because we needed to stop the boom and bust, second somebody, put them back, second somebody, put them back. So this has been about providing a lot more clarity and a lot more focus, and the results will say whether this has worked or not over time. We've just had HMI in the organisation. We've had the in-service weeks in the organisation, and this has been part of the evidence. You know, where is your strategy? Where is your focus? And of course, the sector in the last year or half has had a lot of approach and negative press, and we need to work hard to reinstill the confidence of communities, as Michael's referenced as well. So I believe that this is what that is part of doing. The proof will be of the pudding will be in the eating, as they say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Patience?
Yeah, I can say that this is a very excellent piece of work. But what I want to say is that you're doing so well in ethnic minority. So can we, disabled staff has gone down compared to 2013. Do you have an idea why it's gone down, or what can you do more?
No, I don't think we're totally clear as to why, and I think, you know what I was saying about the data and the different staff groups, I think some further analysis into that would be useful to see actually has it declined across all staff groups, or is it, for example, just within support staff. So certainly we can do some more work on that. I think there's potentially another issue as well, is that staff don't always recognise themselves to have a disability or choose to not declare that to us for a variety of reasons. So again, I think that's something that we need to look at.
The other interesting thing, I mean, it's a really valuable question, Patience, but I think the other interesting thing that tables like this don't always shine a light on is that whilst we might have made a slight slip backwards in terms of the number of disability staff with disabilities, what the table obviously doesn't speak to is the strides we've made in terms of provision for disabled staff who are here. And I know if Tom were in the room and a number of other colleagues, he would be shouting loudly about the significant progress we've made for provision of disabled staff. So, you know, there's a sort of two sides to the coin here, isn't there? There's one about number of staff, but there's also the changes that you've made internally within an organisation, and obviously they're not captured within this report, but they have been captured in previous reports that we've had to the Strategic Inclusion Board and to Policy and Strategy Committee. Richard?
Well, I was going to pick up on that point actually when you look at the table. Well, actually, first of all, when you look at paragraph 1.7, it says, whilst the pace of change has been slow. Well, I must admit, when I looked at the table, I thought with the exception of the disabled staff, I thought actually it's not bad really when you look at the percentage differences between 2013 and 2023. But yes, I did circle the disabled staff as well. And actually, I think you probably answered the question. I think a lot of people who are disabled may not necessarily regard themselves or don't like to regard themselves as being disabled. So I suppose the challenge is to somehow give people the confidence to to make that statement, if you like, for want of a better effect. But if you have got any other ways of not just getting people who perhaps are disabled to accept that they're disabled, but also to, as you say, to encourage new people to come in. So I know it's not easy, and you're dealing with, at the end of the day, we're all dealing with human thoughts and emotions and things, aren't we? So, but I think it's looking pretty good on the whole, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, the recommendations are on page 12 of our agenda, which is that members endorse a long-term commitment to workforce diversity via a 10-year diversity plan, that we note the contents of the report, and that we agree to receive further updates via the Human Resources Committee, as Lee has made reference to. I'll move the recommendations. Somebody happy to second those?
Second.
They're seconded. All colleagues in favour? Yeah? They're agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. That's agreed unanimously. Thank you, Leila, and thank you, Matt. Thank you to everybody who's fed into that piece of work. Item 6 then is the Manchester Arena Inquiry Volume 2 update. And I think Damien's going to provide introduction of this report.
Morning, Chair. Thank you very much. Morning, members. Yes, so this is an update on the Manchester Arena inquiry, which members first received back in 2023 from the recommendations in terms of the improvement plan that came from the Manchester Arena inquiry, which was published on the 3rd of November 2022. Members will be aware of the tragic loss of life from this the terrorist attack that occurred at Manchester Arena back in 2017. And I think whilst we cover these, it's very mindful that we remember the 22 people who lost their lives and the over 1,000 people who were injured, and the real importance of making sure we learn from this event. And the inquiry has highlighted that not only for the fire service but for all parties that were involved in the response on that evening. For ourselves and for the update of the report today, there's two key areas, one around our service, but then also how we work with our partners across the Local Resilience Forum. And we'll start with the activity specifically within Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service. Our risk and assurance team was led on the review of the inquiry report and the recommendations within that, and there were 53 recommendations in total which are applicable directly to ourselves in the fire service. Those activities have been reported through to Policy and Strategy Committee last year, and we've been working on those diligently during that time with the oversight of the Chief Fire Officer through our Community Risk Management Plan Assurance Board. We had, of those 53 recommendations, pleased to report that 32 of those have been closed. And for an example, many of those revolve around our training, the training and assurance of staff, and also the update of our policy and procedures and alignment to national changes, particularly in relation to the joint operating principles for a marauding terrorist attack, which we have seen updated nationally and implemented locally, with all of our staff receiving the operational training for that. 21 of the recommendations continue to be worked on. They continue to be scrutinised by both our operational assurance team and also the CRMP Assurance Board. And we're pleased to report that all of those outstanding recommendations are on track to be completed by December 2024, which was the original deadline date set for those. We're also heavily involved in the National Fire Chiefs Council coordination around this in terms of our reporting of progress against the recommendations and feeding into the strategic board at a national level to provide that assurance. With partners as well, so through the Local Resilience Forum, we have taken a leading role in this, and we chair the subgroup which has attendance from all emergency responders within Nottingham and Nottinghamshire across Category 1 and Category 2 partners. And within that network, 55 recommendations were highlighted from Volume 2 report for partners to action. And these really focus on making sure that we have an effective joined-up approach to a marauding terrorist attack, making sure that we learn lessons from that tragic night in 2017. There have been some challenges engaging with partners, particularly around capacity, in terms of being able to make sure that we engage with them and progress our actions. However, we're pleased to report that 33 of those actions have now been completed, and scrutiny continues over the outstanding 22 actions We continue to work with partners both at chief officer level and at the tactical practitioner level in terms of completing that work. Scrutiny of that subgroup continues through the LRF's Resilience Working Group and continue to be reported at the full level group as well. I think it's also just important to highlight to members section 2.13 onwards that we haven't just taken this work and introduced new policies and procedures. We also carry out a lot of assurance work as well around our ability and capability to respond to an incident similar to that we saw at the Manchester Arena. In March, the service undertook its largest full-scale and no-notice exercise. So our responding crews, our specialist teams and officers all responded to an exercise at no notice with no prior warning to thoroughly test our ability to deal with an incident such as this, also including incorporation of our joint fire control colleagues over in Derbyshire. And that exercise involved the evacuation of over 7,000 people from a sports venue in the city and simulating a realistic terrorist attack scenario. That involved all blue light partners and including specialist national responders as well. I would like to extend our sincere thanks to the National Ice Arena, to the Nottingham Panthers and to their fans for the ability to undertake an exercise of that scale. It really is a unique learning opportunity and a real chance for us to assure our operational standards should an event like that occur. That exercise continues to be subject to a full formal debrief across all partners and will incorporate that learning into the learning from the Manchester Arena inquiry. We continue to progress the recommendations across the both the Local Resilience Forum and within the service, and the CRMP Assurance Board chaired by the Chief Officer continues to provide oversight of that. We also continue to provide reports to the Community Safety Committee due to the relevance to that committee as well, and we will propose to bring a final sign-off to Fire Authority in December 2024. It should also be noted, His Majesty's Inspectorate, as the Chief mentioned, after the first item has just completed their inspection of Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service in service, and they are expected to audit progress against the recommendations of our Volume 2 in the next tranche of inspections that we see. One final point I just wanted to highlight to members as we look at the financial implications, particularly in section 3.2. The specific grant that we are given by government for our response and preparations around marauding terrorist attack and specialist capabilities is reduced from £56,000 a year to £19,500 a year as of April 2023. That means that the replacement of equipment, facilitation of training and continued investment in our specialist capabilities is funded from service budgets. So it does present a continued demand, an increasing demand on those budgets, which members will be aware we have to take a great diligence over making sure we can deliver a balanced budget each year. So that additional cost has been incorporated into our 2024-2025 funding, but it does present a continued demand upon those budgets. That is everything from the update, Chair. There are two recommendations from the paper in that we ask members to note the contents of the report, but also that further monitoring and scrutiny is continued through Community Safety Committee with that report back to full authority in December 2024. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Damien. And just to start on behalf of the authority by reflecting on and remembering the 22 people who were killed on the 22nd of May, obviously innocent lives lost tragically, and the 1,017 people who were tragically injured as part of this horrific attack. God knows what the families are still going through in terms of psychological trauma and loss of life of loved ones. And I think that has to be the place we start whenever we're having a conversation about this awful incident. Just also on behalf of the authority to thank our staff for the way they've responded and engaged in this issue. Obviously, the report shows that we've been diligent and methodical in terms of going through the individual issues, criticisms that were raised by the inquiry, the LRF, obviously, us taking a lead role in the Local Resilience Forum and the response that we've given. But I think what was particularly pleasing for me when I read this report was to see the real life practical testing of those recommendations in relation to the incident that you've referred to, but also in relation to the ongoing training that clearly we give to our staff week in, week out. And that exercise with 7,000 people involved and the amount of people that will be involved from the emergency services clearly is no straightforward task. So I thank you to everybody involved, because I think that live testing of these things is really, really important. I have to say I was utterly dismayed, notwithstanding the fact that I know that the Chief will have made sure that this does not impact on our operational ability. I was utterly dismayed to see what I think is an incredibly wrong-headed decision of the government to reduce the money for any marauding terrorist attack provision in the service from £56,000 down to 19. That's more than halving. It's almost dropping by 2/3 the funding as of April last year for that provision. And I particularly think for us as a service, I understand this is a decision that's been implemented by the government across the country for each individual service, but I particularly think it's wrong-headed as a decision by the government for us here in Nottinghamshire, given what happened here in Nottingham not many months ago, including the loss of lives that we had where we did have somebody marauding around Nottingham with a knife and in a vehicle, and lives being lost. So I will be making representations to see that we can get a change in decision by the government on that issue. Clearly the Chief will be putting in provision to make sure that decision doesn't have an operational impact on us. We will have to withstand that in terms of our own budget, but if we're going to deal with these situations, they need to be dealt with collaboratively, and that needs to be central government, local government, the emergency services working collectively together. And what we don't need are decisions taken in one place that have impact elsewhere, which it seems to me this is. So I will be making representations about that, particularly given the circumstance that we face here in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire in terms of the recent horrific incident that we had in the city centre. But overall, the report, I think, is an excellent piece of work. I think colleagues in the service deserve commendation. Clearly, it's not a piece of work that we close off after today. It's an ongoing piece of work alongside some of the other challenges nationally that we've seen around Grenfell and other issues that the services face. But just as chair of the authority, I'd like to say thank you for being involved with this work, and I know how seriously our colleagues who work in the service take issues like this. Any other comments or questions from colleagues? Nigel?
Just briefly, in 2.4 we have a confirmed completion date. In 2.11, is there any deadline date? Is it because it's working with other partners that's causing
so internally we obviously have a bit more control over the allocation of resources and the work that's being done, so we're confident we'll meet that deadline of December 2024. In terms of the work with the LRF and partners, because of the nature of some of the partners that work within the LRF, they cover the East Midlands, so therefore the demand has been broader. I know the Chief Officer has made representation to other Chief Officers around ensuring that we can prioritise that work. And at the moment there has been a bit of slippage in some of those actions that are outstanding. Now I'm confident over recent weeks we've had better engagement with partners and we'll report back to the full LRF in terms of that progress. The reality is that if we continue to see that slippage, there will be a slightly extended deadline in terms of those requirements. However, we are doing everything, I can assure you we are doing everything to try and corral that work together and work in partnership to offer support to partners where we may have carried out activities or have better oversight. So whilst the deadline may be a bit longer through the LRF, I can assure you the work within Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service is on track and being progressed presently.
There's just add to that, Councillor, there's a little bit about the scrutiny of government, because this is subject to an inquiry. So I think partners, if I'm sure they all recognise the importance of it, but central governments are coming back to make sure that these lessons have been learned and don't get repeated in exactly the same way. Every incident is completely different. These incidents are incredibly dynamic. And what we're talking about is making sure the structure and the training is right, that you can apply and then adapt it what you see on the ground. So I think all partners are aware of the government scrutiny on it. You are scrutinising us. This is open and transparent, this report, so public can get some confidence about what's in place. A couple of comments, if I can, Chair, because there's Operations-wise, I'm super proud of the capabilities we've had over many years, and that's been subject to quite a lot of challenge about whether it's a firefighter's role or not. It's clearly the role of the Fire and Rescue Service to respond to terrorism. The argument's always been about the marauding terrorism a little bit. And I think the public aren't interested in the type of, the methodology of a terrorist. They're interested in knowing their emergency services can respond. So there's a reputational thing here. We've deployed it in anger, along with our police colleagues, and we've learnt lessons from that. And we've also shared our learning from that operational deployment through national operational and joint operational learning. And the chair is right. You as an authority, you can only provide X amount of money for us as a service to deploy, and it certainly hasn't impacted, from what I can see, on the specific capabilities. If anything, I think it's focused in the mind of all firefighters and operational staff. So it is a challenge. We'd welcome some relief of pressure if we could, but we work within the means we've got. And just really to add to Damien's point about the work that's gone on over a number of years by many, many staff, culminating in 7,000 people being involved in an exercise, I would suggest is fairly unique nationally. And I think that's just part of our attitude to what makes a good organisation outstanding. So just try and give you some confidence there. It's challenging, it's difficult, there's lots of national things involved in it, including trade unions and their role in terms of protecting the rights and terms and conditions of their members. But super proud of what we've achieved so far. Very confident about our approach by December. It's ambitious, it's challenging internally with all the rest of things that's going on, and with our partners, as Damien said, I'm in regular conversation with other chief executives about their role in making sure that they play a part.
Thank you, Chief. Patience, yeah.
Yeah, as you said, we are on track, and the deadline is December. After the deadline, will you come back to the committee? No.
The proposal is that we come back to full authority, because the original report was received by full authority and discharged through committee. So on closure, the proposal was to go back to full authority. Obviously that will come through as we get regular deadlines and updates. We'll bring that through committee as well. So there'll be regular reporting, so you've got that oversight and scrutiny prior to that time, with the proposal to then close the full report to say we're confident we've met all the recommendations for volume 2 of the Manchester Arena inquiry at full authority at that point, if that's supported.
Thank you, Patience. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. The recommendations are on page 18, which is that we note the update from this report and endorse the actions being taken by the service in response to the Manchester Arena inquiry, and that we receive further reports for the monitoring and scrutiny of the implementation of learning through the Community Safety Committee. So I'll move the recommendations. Somebody have to second the recommendations?
Second.
Yeah. Are they all agreed, colleagues?
Yeah, I agree.
They're agreed unanimously. Thank you. Item 7 then is exclusion of the public. So we've to consider excluding the public from the meeting during consideration of the remaining items in accordance with Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 under Schedule 12A Part 1, on the basis that, having regard to all the circumstances, the public interest in maintaining an exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I'll move the recommendation. Is that seconded?
Second.
That's agreed, colleagues, is it?
I agree.
Thank you. Thank